Good evening, you're watching Left, Right and Centre. I'm Nidhi Razdan. India is moving quickly on the diplomatic front, trying to isolate Pakistan globally to get the world to see its role as a state sponsor of terror. As Nawaz Sharif prepares to go to town on Kashmir at the UN General Assembly tonight, Sushma Swaraj is readying a hard-hitting speech of her own in the next week. Two US lawmakers today have embarrassed Nawaz Sharif by moving a legislation in the US Congress to designate Pakistan as a state sponsor of terrorism, which is something the State Department has done in the past with countries like Syria and Iran, for instance. Now, it's a largely symbolic move, but it is one nonetheless that would come as an embarrassment to the Pakistani Prime Minister. Also today, for the first time since the Uri attacks, the Ministry of External Affairs and Foreign Secretary Jai Shankar summoned Pakistan's High Commissioner to India, Abdul Basit, strongly protesting the attack in Uri and also presenting to him concrete evidence on the Pakistani involvement that includes GPS data from the bodies of the terrorists with coordinates that indicate the point in time of infiltration across the LOC, grenades with Pakistani markings, communication matrix sheets and other stores made in Pakistan, including food, medicine and clothes. That's what the official statement of the Ministry of External Affairs says. So as India looks to the world for support, the question we're asking tonight is, can and will Pakistan ever be declared a terrorist state, as Rajnath Singh had said on day one of the Uri attack? Joining us on the program tonight, India's former envoy to the United Nations, Mr. Hardeep Puri, Jyoti Malhotra, senior journalist and writer here in the studio with us. Ambassador K.C. Singh joins us again tonight from Delhi. Tavleen Singh joins us tonight, and Radneep Surjewala of the Congress Party, the head of the Congress's media division, joins us as well. Mr. Hardeep Puri, to you first. We finally summoned Abdul Basit. We've seen a strong body of evidence, the MEA says, that has been presented to him, and the MEA going on to say, we now expect a response from the government of Pakistan. We're ready to provide you DNA and samples and fingerprints as well. Is this India also then showing to the world that, look, we're trying to deal with this maturely, we're giving them a chance to investigate this fairly, and then we'll see what we can do? Well,
absolutely. Given Pakistan's past responses and their conduct, I think we want to give them the opportunity of looking at the additional evidence that we are presenting now and to see what kind of response we will get. I have no doubt as to what is likely to be the Pakistani response, but in the fitness of things, we must be seen to be going through this step, and then even as we consider a multi-layered strategy on how to deal with the evolving situation.
And of course, the Pakistani response is likely to be, well, there is no evidence of any Pakistani role. This is very different from Pathankot, isn't it, where there was a much more conciliatory, let's try and investigate this together kind of attitude. Here it's completely different.
Absolutely. You know, Nidhi, that the Pathankot attacks took place exactly a week after the Prime Minister went to Lahore to Raiwind to participate in Nawaz Sharif's granddaughter's wedding. And what was interesting then, I think, after the Pathankot attack was that the Pakistan government condemned the attack. I don't think that has happened so far.
No, it hasn't. Yeah.
And Nawaz Sharif then called up the PM a day later and said that this is really bad and we cannot let the peace process stall. But in fact, this time there has been no condemnation officially. And I think Nawaz Sharif, as you said, is going to speak at the UNGA tonight, and he's probably going to, most likely he's going to have this big case against India. India's sort of human rights violations inside Kashmir. But the point is that what the Pakistani narrative, and which you hear in the media, is that the Indians have done this to themselves, and that I find really horrifying, that the Pakistani media would accept a Pakistan army, I would imagine, explanation
or narrative,
narrative to say that the Indian establishment or Indian forces or even Kashmiris, one Pakistani general told me that the Kashmiris who are so angry with the way the Indian security forces, that they have now done it to themselves.
It's actually incredible, Mr. K.C. Singh, how the atmosphere has changed so dramatically since Pathankot and now. How closely do you think India will be watching Nawaz Sharif's statement in terms of how Sushma Swaraj will formulate her speech as well? Or do you think it's pretty clear already to the MEA and to her, to the government, about what line she is going to take on Monday?
I think it's the first time that I think the context is wider with the US congressman introducing legislation to the effect Pakistan should be declared a state sponsoring terror and so on and so forth. So I think there's a lot of rumble and noise which has already been generated about terror, Pakistan. Then the event itself in New York, the Afghan who went to Pakistan, probably got radicalized, came back. that Nawaz Sharif will find that he's really sailing into headwind. So it's not just him and India. The context has changed. I think India has played their cards very well today, because you look like a very responsible country. You're not straight away saying we will attack or we will take action, etc. Those options are on the table. But you first give Pakistan an opportunity to react to a reasonable presentation made by the Foreign Secretary, giving concrete proof of arms they were carrying, of intercepts, of various other material, very clearly linking these terrorists to Pakistan. And what we are asking for is, will you cooperate? Will you take the DNA samples? And will you work with us? Now, that's a window that India has opened for Pakistan to be able to retreat from what they are doing, and the civilian government for exerting some pressure on the military. Now, it's a choice they make. Probably they may not take it. But nevertheless, it's a very clever ploy right just before Nawaz Sharif is speaking. And interestingly, he is the last speaker for lunch today. He is the 16th speaker.
That's right.
The 4th speaker is the Chinese premier, and the 10th speaker is the Afghan vice president. So even the Afghan vice president, let's hope, contextualizes the whole thing and brings in terror. So it'll not be just India tomorrow or day after or on Monday, but it'll be even before Nawaz Sharif speaks. There may be others in the General Assembly who bring up the question of Pakistan not addressing the thing.
I just want to take what you said on, for instance, the US congressman Tavleen saying, often we get very excited when a senator or a US lawmaker says something about Pakistan and talks about too much US aid being given to Pakistan, although we've seen certainly a shift in the mood in the US Congress in recent months. But do you see this as more than symbolic to lawmakers moving this legislation? Of course, it's a sort of a lame duck Congress now, but do you think it does send an important message?
Frankly, I don't set much store by it, because I actually think that the Americans are in the same situation as we are. You have a nuclear armed rogue state. So you have the choice of either dealing with it or letting it slip beyond the pale. Now, with the world the way it is at the moment, with jihadism being the enemy of the so-called civilized world, if Pakistan is not engaged, then Pakistan becomes nuclear jihad central. So, I think that the Americans are, it's very nice that they're making all these noises, but what can they do more than they've already done? So I see it really just as a symbolic gesture. I think that we in India need to be much clearer in what our policy is. We need to make clear that we will not accept a redrawing of India's borders. And I think that when you put that down in black and white, then we can begin to see some sort of change. Otherwise, I see the usual bumbling along as we've done.
But that's always been clear that there will be no
I don't think it's been clear at all.
Manmohan Singh said that.
I don't think it's clear at all. I think that even when we're engaging with the Kashmiris, we don't make it clear. We tend to speak in a very sort of ambiguous way about this, because if it was clear, then we would, I think, see much more, definite action from Pakistan on what it plans to do next.
Well, Hardeep Puri has a quick interjection on that before I come to Mr.
I think
Surjewala.
it's been very clear as to where we stand on the territorial integrity question. I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever. I think what has changed now is the new context, and I think what we need to do is to drive the message home to those who are calling the shots in Pakistan that there is a price to be paid for continuing with the same old policy. That, I think, we've reached the inflection point, and I think it has to be hardball from now on. And insofar as any government, I don't think the Manmohan Singh government, with all in fairness to them, or this government even much less so, can at any point of time consider a territorial adjustment.
Absolutely.
So I think that is out of the question, and if anyone has projected that as an opening or as a possibility, I'm afraid there's a major misunderstanding here.
Mr. Surjewala, I have actually refrained from bringing opposition parties on the show over the last 3-4 days because it often degenerates into a blame game. And while the Congress has been very critical of Mr. Modi's foreign policy, if I could ask you today, looking at the MEA's statement today, it's a very measured statement. Evidence has been presented to the Pakistani High Commissioner. Would you say that it shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction, and it does, the government does need support at this time on this.
Nidhi, let me begin by saying, and we said it on the first day and we maintain, anything that government does in national interest has the support of entire nation, including the Indian National Congress. We supported Vajpayee ji during Kargil war unequivocally, and we will continue to do so in the best interest of the country. However, there are three aspects. What is the response that government can take? If I may just ask myself. One could be a diplomatic isolation that my other colleagues on the panel have spoken about. I am sure government would do so. Another could be economic sanctions, which government of India needs to move quickly so that it hurts the Pakistani military and establishment rather than only the common person. And thirdly would be the strategic response. What is that strategic response is something that government of the day and Prime Minister needs to decide. The strategic response should not become or lead us into a strategic defeat vis-a-vis the Pakistan, because there are many players. Those who lost loved ones are players because they are demanding retribution. You don't have to necessarily accept, but you need to listen to them. Large number of countrymen feel that they have had enough. An inflection point has been reached and some concrete action needs to be done. There has to be a considered, measured diplomatic and policy response, and all of these need to be married in a manner which makes us come out as a strong nation, and that is something that government of the day must decide.
Well, I don't think they would ever reveal what their strategy is, but my question, Jyoti Malhotra, also is about what other means India can use diplomatically. And one of the things that has been suggested and talked about in recent days is the Indus Waters Treaty. Let India use the weapon of water against Pakistan. If you could very simply explain that to our viewers, and whether that is actually the most potent weapon India has.
But just quickly, Nidhi, before I answer the Indus Waters Treaty question, just to Mr. Surjewala's point, I think it might be a good idea also for the Prime Minister perhaps to have
an all-party
meeting and call the Congress President, call senior leaders of the opposition. After all, Manmohan Singh was Prime Minister when the 2008 Mumbai attacks took place. And we did invoke sanctions against Pakistan, if you remember. Flights were shut down, etc., etc. So it might be a good idea to show, sort of present a united picture, which the Congress Party is willing to do anyway. On the Indus Water Treaties question, first of all, let me say, I think it would be a terrible idea if we call off or sort of mitigate the Indus Waters Treaty, which has actually held since 1960. And we've had several wars after that, 2 wars and a conflict. If you count Kargil as a war, then that's 3 wars. Now, what happens in any water agreement is that the upper riparian state, or the country from where the headwaters sort of, the source of the Indus is in the Himalayas. It's not in India in that sense. But it flows through India and then comes down towards Pakistan. So Pakistan is a lower riparian state. Now, under international law, you cannot stop the waters of a river that flows.
But if you do?
But if you do, then that's an act of war. So I think that's completely and cannot be allowed to even be thought of by the Modi government, because then you would be directly actually affecting the people of Pakistan, and I think that's completely unacceptable. There have other, there's been also...
Before I come to that, it just because I wanted to since it's been written about as well, Mr. K.C. Singh, do you agree with Jyoti that it can be an effective weapon if India used water as a weapon, but should India do it, and can India do it?
Look, it's a bilateral agreement. Only thing is that World Bank underwrote it, so World Bank comes into it. But firstly, we don't have the mechanism for it. For starters, maybe we should just start creating some canal system, etc. It doesn't mean you're going to do it. But if the other country is using completely extra legal, completely asymmetrical methods against you and is living in denial, well then so be it. You look what the Chinese are doing as upper riparian to Brahmaputra. You think they give a damn about making dams there? They're even talking of diverting the water north. Water is a weapon. The Israelis have done it to River Jordan. Now,
so you're saying it's a legitimate tool.
It doesn't mean we should.
Jyoti, either you have...
Sorry, Mr. Singh. Sorry, Mr. Puri just wanted to come in on that point.
Either you have respect for the rule of law, or you don't. If you sponsor terror from across the border and you've been doing it on a consistent basis and you've been in denial, clearly you don't have respect for law, because terrorism takes away the most fundamental right of all, the right to life. So all I'm saying is, and I agree with Casey,
it's a legitimate tool if India wants to use it.
Listen, it is already, when you do something like Uri, you're already declaring war. And either we accept that or not. So I'm totally in agreement with Casey. We have to look at all the options on the table. I'm afraid we have acquiesced in a situation. I'm not recommending that we do X, Y, or Z.
I'm so glad that you're not recommending that.
All I'm saying is a democratically elected government which has the mandate to safeguard the country on issues of peace and security will have to consider that option. What options they decide to exercise finally, I don't think it can be business as usual. In other words, you cannot have a situation where our tolerance level, the threshold keeps going up with each attack, and then we say we get down to talk, because those assurances are not worth the paper they are written on.
I understand what you're saying, and Jyoti, I think the point is that I think people are afraid of a conventional war, what that could possibly lead to. This is being, the water war is being called an unconventional method. It's not been done yet. It would, as you say, be extreme. But should it be off the table is the question.
Well, that depends, right? I mean, everything is on the table, and several alternatives are off the table.
War.
Now, can you say, for example, there's been also the suggestion that the Karachi port should be embargoed by the Indian Navy. Is that an option? That has been discussed, by the way. So stopping water to the people of Pakistan, stopping food and health supplies to the people of Karachi and that part of Pakistan.
Jyoti,
my argument is
my argument is calibrating
that,
it.
Absolutely. My argument is that of course you must exercise. You must have an array of options and alternatives. Any country which is being hurt repeatedly would do that, and of course there is considerable anger in the country. Okay, my point is that quickly is that you have to distinguish the Pakistan army from the people of Pakistan, and unfortunately every government since Atal Bihari Vajpayee and perhaps before has said that.
Mr. Singh, quick response.
Somehow the government doesn't seem to implement it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think this is the traditional approach, that there are the people, there's a civilian government, there is the army. That thing is not working. And don't forget, these recruits are all from rural areas of Punjab. Now, we are not saying stop all the water. Now, if they can calibrate terrorism, switch it on and off, you are just threatening to take away some water and increase it if they don't come to their senses. So there is nothing else that we have which we can use for calibration. Otherwise you just could, like, if you embargo the port or you go and surround it, that's war. But really siphoning off water and sending a signal that unless you behave yourself, this will get worse, is a way of calibrating an instrument and getting them to behave.
Yeah, Tavleen Singh, what do you think? Could this be an unconventional method with which to strike back?
Well, to tell you the truth, they've been claiming that India is depriving it of water right from 1947. So I actually don't see that as a real tool. What really worries me, as somebody who's followed the story quite closely for many years, is that in India, we seem not able to defend ourselves. So there's no point in, they're fighting an unconventional war. Why are we not defending ourselves unconventionally? Why are we not able to match their tactics? To tell you the truth, I see no improvement in national security since 2008. So we have all these sweet diplomatic, our diplomats are very good at putting all kinds of, loops around the whole story. But the fact is that we have not improved our national defenses either along the coastline,
I agree,
or internally, or in Kashmir since 2008. Why can't we do that? Forget about the water thing just now. Let's just defend ourselves better.
Well, that's a perfectly valid point, and to be honest, that was raised on day one itself, when concerns were also raised about how terrorists were able to enter what should have been an extremely secure base in Uri, right on the line of control. Mr. Surjewala,
a brigade camp.
And that's an extremely valid point, and is a separate point. But Mr. Surjewala, would the Congress support a drastic steps if it was consulted, would you like to see an all-party meeting? Would you want that? Would you want to discuss this with the government?
Nidhi, in such circumstances, the first thing that government should have done is taken on board all the political parties as also other security experts. Unfortunately, this is a government where even Foreign Affairs Minister is not even called for the meeting for the first 2 days. That's the tragedy. The problem is there is a command and control failure. There is a failure of operational and intelligence apparatus, and there is a failure of political leadership to drive things around, partially because Mr. Modi is captive of his own rhetoric and platitudes that he raised in the run-up to 2014 elections by saying, don't write love letters to Pakistan,
what did you do after
we will show them
26/11?
56 inches test, etc., etc. The truth remains that all stakeholders need to be brought on board, and a concerted but decisive way forward needs to be
I think no one can argue with
what
that.
has to be,
Yeah, you're
has
right.
to be decided by the government.
An all-party meeting is
no,
in order.
I mean, all-party meeting by all means, but I would hold judgment on political leadership, etc., because I've been a civil servant for 40 years, and most of it has been under a different political dispensation. So if I were to start off on what political leadership, we got hit X place, our counselor in the attack on our embassy in Kabul, let's hold judgment. Let this play out, and then we will be able to make an assessment of what constitutes decisive and mature political leadership. So that's the only submission I would make to my learned friend, Mr. Surjewala.
Okay, let me ask both you and Jyoti before we wrap up. Do you realistically see a situation where Pakistan is declared a state sponsor of terrorism? For instance, the State Department actually defines what that means and what it would involve. It's already done it with a few countries like Syria and Iran in the past. Do you really see that happening with Pakistan?
There are two issues involved. This is a very eminent and sensible cataloguing of Pakistan's role in global terror. I think that HR 60, I forget the number, is a very well drafted document. But as you understand Pakistan, it is a pariah state. And the more of a pariah state, the issue is, will it stop those acts of terror? To me, that process has to be concomitant. It has to go along with the other efforts we do. We have to send a message to those who are calling the shots that they have to pay a price for this. The two going together will have an impact. Our previous policy was we will always issue strong statements and not back that up by decisive action. I believe that is going to change.
And what is the decisive action
Well,
you think will happen now? I'm not military action, but apart from that.
Look, I am averse to the idea of uniformed, senior uniformed, ex-uniformed people sitting on prime-time television and discussing options. I don't think we have the mandate. I certainly don't. I think we have a mature government, a government which will weigh all the options, which will think them through and then accordingly decide. Very fact that we have given them an opportunity by sharing the evidence is the start of a process, not a culmination of a process.
Jyoti,
I would agree. I think the government has been very mature about the whole thing. They have refused to, for example, listen to several TV channels, except yourself, of course, saying that we must go to war.
All its own leaders like Ram Madhav, who talked about the job for the truth on
I
day
would
one.
agree with you. So I think Mr. Modi has kept his cool, and I think he will not go up the escalatory ladder. I don't think so. But I also would like to say that I don't think the Americans are going to label Pakistan a state sponsor of terrorism. The Americans need the Pakistanis too much. The war in Afghanistan isn't over yet. And even though the Americans, they're an intelligent power, they're sort of trying to use alternative means through Iran now increasingly, since they've done their deal with Iran, through Central Asia, but they still need Pakistan. They know that they have to bite the poison bullet, and that's what India should do.
And therefore, Mr. Casey, saying last question to you, the question then is, when India goes out with this, offensive diplomacy, as it's being called, this diplomatic offensive, when we say we want to isolate Pakistan, how much do you think Pakistan will actually be isolated at the global stage?
The whole world will isolate them is impossible. It's not going to happen. Pakistan has multiple cards to play. But if you see the reactions that have come in, they are certainly, the reactions are broader. They're coming from a larger range of countries than we have seen in the past. Certainly 2 members of the SARC have very boldly spoken up against Pakistan as a font of terror. We'll see if the Vice President of Afghanistan brings it up in the General Assembly today. That'll be a first. because I don't think anyone ever has done that in the General Assembly other than India. Will Bangladesh bring it up there? So slowly the circle is narrowing around Pakistan. You do that, that is one thing. But I think 4 things very quickly need to be done. PM needs to bridge the distrust which is there between opposition parties and him very quickly domestically. We need to reach out to the valley, not ignore that. The problem is the valley. Pakistan is only coincidentally a problem. The main problem is the valley. Then your options, keep the diplomatic pressure up, and I have a suspicion if there is any military action at all, it'll wait till winter is near. So we have a couple of months for all these other things. Get your house in order and then use the options if you want to.
Well, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us tonight and giving us a very interesting and varied perspective on this big story. And like I've been saying for several days now, I'm sure whatever the government decides to do, it's certainly not going to make that announcement loudly on television, certainly if it comes to any action that goes beyond the diplomatic option. Thank you to you all for joining us. We'll see you again tomorrow.